Tonight, we're here to discuss vaccination, but hopefully we would have insights out of this conversation that would help us make informed decisions on our stand when it comes to do with vaccination. And I'm so excited to have me here, healthcare professionals. So we're not getting people who have no understanding of what this conversation is about, but we've got healthcare professionals who would sort of guide us through this whole thing about vaccination. And hopefully by the end of this conversation, we would have broken certain myths, changed mindsets, and also given us a better understanding in order to help us protect ourselves and protect our community. I've got another point here, which actually I had an experience with this over the weekend. So over the weekend, I went and had my fourth booster. And when I announced, I was actually at a gathering, and I said, I've got to go and take my fourth booster. And everybody pounced me, again? When are you going to stop? When is this whole booster upon booster upon booster going to stop? And I think it's something that really, people are thinking, are we having to go and get a booster every year? Is this going to be our life for the rest? What do you have to say about things like that?
It's almost like the same way we keep getting new prime ministers, new boosters. I think Dr. Logan touched on it earlier. Yeah. We had different variants of the vaccine, and there is this ongoing mutation. So that affects the drives for vaccination. It means we may need to top up essentially on our immunity because it wanes over time. So it's important to say that. I think I imagine it will become more stable. People need to think about other diseases that require regular vaccination, like the flu. That's an annual process, and you don't hear people saying again in the same way. So again, I think because it's new, there is this attention on COVID, and people get fatigue. You get vaccine fatigue if you've had your fourth booster. Someone says you got to have another one, number 5, number 6. You get a bit tired of it. But I think it's important to understand the way the virus itself is progressing. It's the driver for these decisions. There's no one sitting in a room somewhere saying, yeah, let's just go for another round of vaccination. So everything is led by the science. And I think we should, this is my view, that we would get to a more stable position where the vaccinations are less frequent, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah. Any of you want to add on to?
No, I think he said exactly right. So we call it as JCVI, which is Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunization. They kind of do all this rigorous process of looking at various, different variants and what's happening around the world and how actually the virus is behaving and therefore how it's actually having an impact and therefore how frequent we need to do. So I think we are expecting the JCVI guidelines in the new year for us to tell in terms of the moving forward for the next calendar year.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Yeah. Because we know that the autumn boosters were focused on 50-year-olds and above. In previous parts of the campaign, we'd gone all the way down to 5-year-olds. It's because we're learning more about the vaccines and we're trying to protect the most vulnerable of our community. So the elderly community, so anyone over 50 years of age is eligible for a booster because of the science that sits behind it. And the younger ones are not eligible because we know that the impact or the effect is not that high on that age group. So I think it's important that we hold on to the point. It's scientifically led, and it's dictated by. We will be looking at the different cohorts and how that is managed as we move forward with the program.
So, with having you guys, people from the healthcare, sector, would you be able to tell us what has been the fatalities in terms of, because that's another area that people are worried about. X person says, I know somebody who took it and he died, and all sort of conversations. I don't know whether there's any statistics out there that can clearly show us that, listen, out of the 80% that we've rolled out this is the percentage that, got affected negatively or whatever. Is there any report or anything like that out there?
I mean, I don't have national data, but so I can speak from my position. So I look after the clinical and quality aspects of the vaccinations for Kent and Medway, where we've delivered just over 2 million vaccinations. And I see all the incidents that take place across that entire system, and I haven't had one single incident of a fatality. So from that perspective, I think it shows the safety profile of vaccination. There would be adverse reactions to vaccine as there are to many other drugs. Some of the most common drugs, paracetamol, ibuprofen, for instance, they're not safe, as it were. There is still the possibility of side effects. This is part and parcel of vaccination. In fact, some of these adverse reactions to vaccination, so headaches, fevers, and so on, almost are an indication that the vaccine is doing its job. So speaking from that perspective, I think hopefully that demonstrates the safety profile of vaccination.
And Philip, can I just add the point around that ongoing monitoring and surveillance of all the vaccinations we use? Because I don't know if you remember when we had the AstraZeneca vaccine, very quickly, the moment we started seeing high incidence of adverse effects, it was quickly reviewed, and then we stopped using that so we could move on to what we knew was kind of giving us less incidence of adverse events. So I think that ongoing surveillance, and every incident that happens with a vaccination is reported, so we collate and track data so that we can share. And I'm sure when you go into that, I can't remember, is it MHRA, you will find information about incidents on there. And yeah,
That interesting, because that brings me to a point where now I want us to speak to people that haven't even had their first COVID vaccine, to take them through that experience. So I don't know if any of you can take us through, what's the process? How do they feel when they take it? Some people are saying, you're going to feel fever. I mean, there's so many different information about as to when you take it, and some people who even like their little alcohol will say, oh, when you take, you can't even drink for, a week and all that. There's so many different conversations out there. Would you want to take us through that experience?
So, I mean, I've worked in the vaccination setting itself,
Right.
delivering vaccination. Right. And ultimately, the process is that patients are assessed at the point of entry, making sure that they're suitable for that vaccine. This is done by a clinician who takes them through the safety profile. So it's not a case of just standing up and someone sticks something in your arm. There are conversations that I had just to make sure that the vaccine is right for the patient and the patient is right for the vaccine. In terms of the aftermath of vaccination, it is the most common side effects are soreness, so sore arm, because the vaccine is injected into the muscle. So even if if you think about a muscle that's strained, you will get some soreness from it naturally. And because of the reaction of the body to the vaccine, there's an immune response that can present as a fever or high temperature, a headache, and just a general feeling of unwellness. These are the most common reactions from vaccination. Not everybody gets it. Those who don't get it shouldn't think that the vaccine isn't working. Everybody reacts differently to vaccines. And it's also important to mention that what the vaccine does is that it introduces what we call a spike protein, which is what sits on the virus into the body. It does not, they're not live vaccines, so you cannot get COVID from vaccination, but it just introduces a protein that's similar to what the virus will introduce into the body, and primes your immune system, so that when you do get the virus, if you do, your body knows what to do and how to deal with it. So this is the advantage of vaccination. And vaccination doesn't mean you would never get the virus or you would never suffer any ill effects of the disease. It simply reduces the possibility that would happen, and reduces the long-term complications, because your body knows what to do and is better prepared to deal with to deal with the disease. So hopefully that gives people a bit of confidence around vaccine, and you can drink your alcohol, no problem, straight away. In fact,
you've just mentioned something, because that's one statement I keep people here say, but he took the vaccine and he caught COVID. So can you educate us that? I mean, you've highlighted it, but can you really stress on that point? They keep saying that, well, sure, I took the vaccine and I caught COVID.
Yeah. I mean, you can always take paracetamol, but you still have a headache.
I like that.
So I think it's important just to, the point we need to drive home is that the vaccines are there to reduce the incidence of disease rather than, take the possibility of it down to zero. There is no vaccine that can stop any disease from certainly happening, but it certainly reduces the possibility of disease and the intensity and severity of the disease as well when you do get it. So I think that's what people need to remember. It's very possible to have the vaccine and then go on to get COVID. It's not an impossibility.
And I think just adding on from that clinical experience, I think in the early waves or wave 2, there was lots of talk about our intensive care units sort of completely being filled up, no capacity. But as you can see sequentially in the subsequent waves, there's lots of talk about hospitalizations, but the ITU beds are no longer filled up. They still get COVID. Yes, you're right, but they don't end up as sick. And they turn around and they go back home quicker. So,
and I think Priscilla mentioned earlier about even taking the vaccine to protect others. So what's this all about? Why should I take a vaccine to protect other people after I'm taking to protect myself?
So we talked about the elderly being the most vulnerable of our communities, and during the height of the pandemic, we saw the high level of mortality in that age group. So, and we know that the younger people will carry viruses and probably will never feel unwell from that virus, and therefore seeing their elderly parents, families can easily transmit, which could impact on those individuals. So I think the message is have your vaccine to protect yourself and your loved ones, which is important because your elderly parents or your grandparents might be at risk without you knowing, and then you pass it on. And I think that was a message that must have been, was it last Christmas, and still holds now, this Christmas period.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Priscilla said, for the current vaccination campaign, the autumn booster program, one of the criteria for eligibility is if you're a household contact of someone who is classed as at risk or immunosuppressed, you should get vaccinated. Priscilla mentioned earlier that the age group begins at 50 for people who are classed as healthy. But just to highlight the importance of getting vaccinated to protect the people around you, your loved ones who are more vulnerable to the disease, it's something that people need to think about as well. So if people are in constant contact, so living with patients who are at risk, and that's a wide definition, people who have specific diseases or taking certain types of medicines that reduce their ability to fight disease, we encourage them to make sure they get vaccinated as well to protect themselves, but also their loved ones.
Could I also add, I think at this point, especially my message for people who have never taken even the first dose, I think we've come this far, about 2 years now. There are more evidence, clinical evidence, and more people have been saved, and a lot of, less mortality and less COVID symptoms. And that is actually a clear evidence why they should get vaccinated. So there is nothing to worry about. It's all backed up clinical evidence. So therefore, if it's an opportunity, please do go and vaccinate would be my message.
That really brings me to you, actually, because I'm sitting here thinking, all right, so the people out there listening, they're thinking, okay, this sounds like I need to take action. But how easy is it and especially when we're talking about the people that are being affected most, those that are not responding, is people from the Black African Caribbean communities, the Asian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and then Chinese, and we now got the Eastern European cohort and coming in. Now, we know, aside the fact that they are skeptical about, we also know that their lifestyle and the way they operate within their communities means that they are not that flexible to just get up and go out there and get themselves vaccinated and things like that. Now, from your point of view, obviously, you're representing us
Yes,
in,
yes,
in
absolutely.
that space. What systems are you putting in place to make it easy for us
Yeah.
to be able to engage and take on this?
I think we call it as an evergreen offer, which means the offer is always there. If you have never had vaccination, it's never too late. Come and have it. You can speak to the GP, you can go and speak to a community pharmacist, you can book it online. Absolutely, and there are many GPs offer evenings, and community pharmacists also offer evenings, weekends, and also, as Priscilla mentioned, there's quite a lot of outreach offers available as well, in a sense that, mobile bus or a van in certain places and pop-up clinics in a shopping mall is available as well. So there's lots of opportunities, I would say. So they can pick from all of these opportunities. Please go and get vaccinated.
We're not seeing those big tents that sort of became the sort of landmark or locations where we all kind of recognize that this is where you go for your COVID vaccine or stuff like that. So you're talking about buses and vans. How are you promoting this to the people in the community to be aware?
So we're using radio, kind of advertising through billboards, through our GP practices, and also making sure that on the national booking system online you can book, and when you go online you can find the nearest walk-in service. What we're also trying to encourage is if people know whether within their communities they haven't been vaccinated, we're always willing to take a bus out to them. We're willing to go to churches. We're willing to go to places of worship, anywhere that we know we can reach our communities. So if anyone is able to kind of support the outreach, but I think there's a lot of information out there on how to access a vaccine.
Now, the big topic, trust. That's been one of the key reasons why the community is disengaging with any outreach activity that obviously the health service is putting out within the community. And obviously some of these issues are justifiable because of personal experiences. And people are going to say to themselves, how do we trust them? How can we trust the National Health Service to be on our side when, from our point of view, we feel that they have never been there for our side? And I think this is an area, because of the way each of you uniquely deal in the community, I'm sure you probably have something to assure us that it's not same old, but things have moved on. So I don't know who would want to kickstart that.
It's certain. I think, like I said earlier, it's important to acknowledge people's views, some of which are based in historical facts. But from 1948, when the NHS sort of began, till now, I think we've moved on a lot. And in order for you to trust, you have to be armed with some knowledge yourself, because that's the only way you're going to accept the service that's been offered to you. So people like myself and my colleagues here in the community doing that outreach work. We've all had the vaccine ourselves, obviously, and that's important to say. And I think trust also can be eroded when myth prevails. So you talked earlier around the mRNA vaccines. One of the things, or a couple of things that has been perpetuated, is that say you're being tracked by the vaccine because it's they're injecting something into you. In fact, I was with my colleagues. We went to do an outreach in a prison, and I was speaking to this young man, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not having the vaccine because they're going to track me." And I said to him, "Well, you're in prison. They know where you are already, so no one's tracking you." But it's important to add that these are not based in any fact. The other thing that people say is that the vaccine will change your DNA and so on. And I think that comes from the fact that the vaccines are called mRNA vaccines, and then 2 + 2 becomes 10. It's simply about the sequencing and the way the vaccines are developed. It's got nothing to do with DNA. It does nothing to alter any of that. Like I said earlier, it simply primes the body by introducing a spike protein. So, I think it's important to listen to the facts around vaccination, and that would help increase that trust, which in turn would hopefully bring people to vaccination sites and centers to get their jabs.
Right.
I think it's also how within our communities we access healthcare services. So I think we are not very proactive in actually going out and seeking those health services. And I think at it now, the NHS is starting to look at how we can make every contact with our communities count and every touch point have an intervention of one sort. So it's not just about the COVID vaccination, but how can you support you in terms of checking your blood pressure, in terms of checking your weight and given you that health messages and health advice. So we are not just looking at vaccinations, but I think we are reaching out into our communities to do a holistic offer of protecting and preventing long-term illnesses within the community. So I think we've talked about vaccinations, but there's a wider health agenda here that we need to start talking about within our communities. Accessing healthcare is really important. I'm from an African background. You'd only go and see your doctor when you are unwell. Yeah. You don't go in and see your doctor just to have a checkup. And I think we need to start changing that narrative within our community. It's so important to go in and have your health checked. Alongside that, as a preventative, you have your vaccination alongside. And those key messages are really important for us to share within our communities.
I think adding on from what Abby said about the mRNA vaccine doesn't change your DNA. Mm. Well, there is something that does that. That's called gene therapy, and that's 2 million per shot. So the vaccine, the vaccine definitely doesn't do that. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but I mean, as a public health consultant, I'm sure you are very often queried in terms of trust. Something that really comes. You're seeing the numbers, you're seeing the statistics. You're in there. You're seeing people, being impacted by whatever disease or whatever that's going. But when you sort of raise that conversation with them, there is an element of trust, thinking that I wouldn't get this resolved if I sort of move into the national health care sector. How are you sort of counteracting such mindset?
I think sometimes it can be quite difficult, and it comes back to my own sort of clinical practice. Yeah. But it's in all things when patients enter the health service, other than hospitals, it's just a two-way conversation. And of course, everyone is adult and everyone can consent to do what they want with their bodies. But we're here to make the country a better place. So, our intentions are right. And for what it's worth, we know the science is right, and we'll have an honest conversation about it.
And I think you are literally in the mix of it all, because you're EDI and you'll be hearing that about trust. And obviously, that's why you're there, to make sure that there's equity, there's, Now, what's your take on this when they come up to you and say, we don't trust the system?
Yeah. And I think one of the important things, I think Priscilla slightly touched it in terms of, where it's quite important which messages are being relied and from which source. So it is going to, not really believing what's on WhatsApp or Facebook or that kind of stuff, but from a trusted source like, National Health Services, or even doctors from your own community. Go and speak to them. If you don't rely on what's actually you're reading, speak to a trusted source and get that information from a reliable source and talk about vaccination, is what I would say. And that's why when we see patients and we see different communities, we provide information and we signpost them to their own community leaders or faith leaders to promote that and to give the right information about vaccination.
Now, this is so important, because what I'm seeing, and that's why we decided that we want to have a panel that's as diverse as this, because people in our communities don't tend to see a representation of them when it comes to these conversations. So they feel like they are piggybacking on somebody else's conversation. And that even then erodes on the trust, because to have people that reflect them from different backgrounds on a panel like this, speaking to this community, sort of would draw them closer to saying, actually, So we've got Black, Asian, you name it, healthcare professionals who are as committed to this whole program, than any other one. And I think that's why we feel that this sort of conversation needs to be had more than of, and also having more ambassadors from within you're the healthcare professionals really going out there and speaking to the community, because most of these people would, like you mentioned, will go to their community leaders. Now, these community leaders are not healthcare professionals. They may be spiritual leaders, or they may be, whatnot, which they have, their good experience in their own right. But I'm not sure whether they are capable and qualified to have these sort of conversations. So what are you guys? If I say you guys, in terms of what's the NHS doing in order to utilize people like yourselves to really help influence these influences?
Sure. I mean, I think, you mentioned faith leaders.
Yeah.
And some of the work that's been going on and that we continue to do is working with these faith leaders. So imams, pastors, working with, wardens of youth centers, prisons, because these are the people that are listened to by these communities. And so if you arm them with the right information, they are able to disseminate that to their communities where and people trust those voices. So that's part of the work that we're doing. So working directly within those communities rather than having a voice that's very central telling people what to do. I think it's important to get down, and then by doing that, we understand some of the reasons for the hesitancy a lot more, and then we can address it. And I think, Prabha, you mentioned WhatsApp messages. I think definitely do not trust WhatsApp messages. It's the worst source of information. Yeah, absolutely. I've banned my mom from sending me those. So, yeah.
I think we need to do more of this. We need to talk to our communities more. So the more you have healthcare professionals having these conversations, I think it will engender that trust that we're looking for within that community. I think one of the pieces of work we've done within Kent and Medway is actually sending people out there to talk, to address those hesitancies, and people who look like them. So we have invested in Black and ethnic minority champions to go out and speak to our communities, because I think there's something about having that personal conversation, feeling that that person understands you and understands your culture and your background and is able to answer some of those questions. So we are investing, and the NHS is very supportive of that. We have worked with different groups. Dr. Logan talked about champions during the testing program, and it's the similar approach we're using with the vaccination program as well, so that when they are discussing the issues, there are things that are quite pertinent to the Black and ethnic minority communities, which are very different from our other communities. So we recognize that and we address those when we're out there.
Dr. Logan, do you want to add on?
No, I think my colleagues have summed it up nicely.
Yeah. Okay. So I would want us to sort of wrap up, but I think it would be important for each one of you, because you represent a community, you represent a group, to really speak your heart out to these people that are watching us today and encourage them, especially this season where we're all coming together as people to celebrate each other and move into this new year and this new age. Let's encourage those that are watching about getting themselves boosted. I don't know, what can we share something with them? Let's encourage.
I mean, so I think I'm gonna approach this from a very personal, and I hope that's okay, because I think we've spoken about the science quite a bit, and I personally know of someone who is in the Black community, a very young, fit person who hadn't had any vaccines or vaccinations as far as COVID was concerned. And unfortunately, and I'm talking someone who's fit, athletic, full of life. Right. Unfortunately, contracted the virus, and is currently a complete shadow of the person he was, because now he's got long COVID. So his health condition has debilitated significantly, and he has become unrecognizable. You would not believe that this is the same person from 6 months ago. And I'm not saying that to, scare anyone. It's just the reality, and it's what I've seen personally. So I would urge people to continue to inform themselves. There is no compulsion. It's a personal decision. But I think, people need to arm themselves with the right information and then go from there. And so I would definitely urge people to listen to this, and if they're not convinced, consult veritable sources, speak to their communities and clinicians within that community. Everybody has a pharmacist. You can always pop in there, have a 10-minute conversation if people need more confidence, because the dangers of contracting, the coronavirus are there. And I would like to urge people to definitely explore the possibility of vaccination.
Thank you very much, Abby. I think that's really helpful to share that, because I know people talk about, and I don't know anyone who's ever had COVID, and all of this thing around vaccination is a myth. But when you work on the front line, or people who work on the front line, you have stories to tell, which our colleagues have shared some of that, and Abby's told his personal story. For me, I just want to emphasize the fact that access to the vaccine it's not a barrier. There are various ways you can access the vaccine. We are going right from those who haven't had a first dose all the way through to the fourth booster. And so if people want to come forward, we haven't heard this and haven't kind of explored some of the science and evidence behind it, the offer is always there. So from my point of view, Abby's just said it's real. And so people need to understand that, and the offer will always be there for them to come forward.
Thanks. Logan?
I think from my perspective, as I mentioned before, I'm sure none of you want to see me this Christmas. So get all your vaccines, not just the COVID vaccine, because it'll keep you safe and at home.
Right. Yeah. Farah?
Thank you, Philip. I think from my perspective, I'll put my equalities hat on. And when I see the gap, it always breaks my heart, because I'm one among, I'm from ethnic minority background, and it's a little bit of frustration, a little bit of anger, and equally a bit of competition as well. Why our uptake rate is not as our white British? Why are we not looking after ourselves? Why are we leaving it at the last moment to get illness? So therefore, I would say prioritize yourself, prioritize your family, prioritize your friends, and go get your vaccination.
Wow. So thank you all so much, Abby, Priscilla, Dr. Logan, Prabha. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. And like you've all heard, if you want to give any gift this Christmas or this season, then make it a gift of protection. And I think we all know now that it's so easy to access the vaccines. There's so much information, genuine information on genuine platforms. I think probably we'll share on the screen. It will be showing on the screen shortly, that link that you can access so that you can find out genuine information and how to also book yourself to get yourself vaccinated, how to find your eligibility and all that. But more important, I'd like to encourage us, members of our community, to really go out there and get yourself vaccinated. And on top, if you're also eligible for the flu vaccine, add that on top as well. You're getting 2 for 1. So yes, this is so important. It's so important in the conversation. Like you've all heard here, we really need to protect our community if we want to thrive. We need to look after our health if we want to thrive as a community. And nobody's too young and nobody's too old. So if you're young and you're fit and energetic, think of your older brother, your father, your grandparents, and the people that are ahead of you, and think about protecting them. So let's all take this effort and encourage one another to take this vaccine seriously. And not only just the COVID vaccine, let's look after our health, and ensure that any vaccine that's set out there to help protect us and give us that well-being, we go for it as much as we possibly can. So thank you all very much. And thank you guys for watching this special episode. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share. And we'd love to hear your feedback. If there's any point that we raise here that is not very clear for you, just send us a note at the bottom of the screen. Send us your comment and let's hear from you. We want this conversation to continue. We want to be able to engage with yourselves and your communities. So together we can thrive. So remember, this Christmas, make your gift a gift of protection. Thank you and goodbye.